The moment the lawyer asked, "Do you know who your biological parents are?" the room stopped breathing. I was just the night nurse attending a general's will reading, but one question made me the center of a 30-year-old secret. I didn't know about the locked chest, the fake will, or the family ready to destroy me a second time. They didn't just hate me, they tried to erase me. My name is Carly Grant. I am almost 30 years old. I'm the lead nurse on the night shift at Ridgefield General. But I used to be a medic in the Army Reserve. That's probably why I was wearing the uniform. It was the only formal thing I owned. My old Army service uniform. The dark blue wool was a little tight in the shoulders now, and it smelled faintly of the cedar chest I kept it in. But it was clean. It was spotless. I'd spent an hour last night ironing the creases sharp enough to cut. I felt the stiff collar rubbing my neck as I pushed open the heavy, smoked glass door of the law office. The firm of Grayson, Holt, and Mercer was on the top floor of the tallest building in Ridgefield, Virginia. The kind of place that smelled like old money and new carpet. The receptionist, a woman with hair sculpted into a perfect blonde helmet, looked at my uniform, looked at my face, and then looked back at her screen. She didn't need to ask my name. My squeaking rubber-soled service shoes had already announced my arrival. I was not one of them. I had no business being here. My presence was a mistake, a clerical error. That's what I kept telling myself. I was here because I was the nurse who had cared for General Everett Cole in his final months. He was a patient, a VIP patient, sure, but a patient nonetheless. I had managed his pain, changed his dressings, and sat with him during the long, dark hours after midnight when the fear set in. He was tough, quiet, and deeply sad. When the summons came, it wasn't a phone call. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope delivered by courier to the hospital. Inside, a heavy cardstock invitation to the reading of his last will and testament. At the bottom, a handwritten note from his lawyer, Mr. Grayson. General Cole specifically requested your presence. The words were vague, unsettling. I assumed it was a formality. Maybe he had left me an old book from his library, or one of the countless military challenge coins he kept in a bowl by his bed. Something simple, a token. I was just there to pay my respects, to get some closure, and then go home and sleep before my shift. Mr. Grayson himself met me at the reception area. He was an older man, tall and thin as a rail, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my car. He didn't smile, but his eyes were kind. Ms. Grant, thank you for coming. He led me down a long hall into the main conference room, and the air was immediately sucked from my lungs. The room was vast. In the center was a mahogany table so long and polished, it looked like a dark, still lake. One wall was a window overlooking the entire city. The other walls were covered in history, photographs of General Cole shaking hands with presidents. I recognized at least 3 of them. There were framed citations, gleaming medals under glass, and oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors. And then there was the family. They were clustered at the far end of the table, a tight knot of expensive black fabric and subdued jewelry. They looked like they'd been carved from ice. Men in dark, perfectly tailored suits, women with pearls gleaming at their throats, their faces smooth and composed. They looked at me as I entered, a single, collective glance. It wasn't curiosity, it was an assessment, a quick, dismissive inventory. My clean uniform, my functional shoes. I was a foreign object, a smudge on their pristine canvas. I felt my face flush. I found the emptiest chair I could, in the furthest corner, behind a potted plant that looked like it belonged in a rainforest, the back row, my comfort zone. I sat down, my back straight, my hands clasped on my lap. I was an outsider, a spectator. I just needed to be invisible for an hour. Mr. Grayson sat at the head of the table and put on a pair of small, gold-rimmed glasses. He opened a thick leather binder. His voice was a dry, even monotone as he began to read. To the Wounded Warrior Project, I bequeath the sum of $500,000. To the West Point Military Academy Library, my personal collection of military history. To my former comrades of the 75th Ranger Regiment, an endowment for their scholarship fund. I listened to the words flow by: numbers, properties, stocks, bonds. It was a life's worth of accumulation being neatly dissected and distributed. It was all going to veterans organizations, to military archives, to charities. It seemed right, a soldier's dignified, orderly ending. The family listened politely, though a few of them were checking their phones under the table. After what felt like an eternity, Mr. Grayson paused. He took off his glasses, polished them, and put them back on. He shuffled a single sheet of paper that was separate from the main binder. "And now," he said, and his voice changed. The monotone was gone. It was clearer, louder. "We come to the final part of the will." A rustle of movement went through the family. A younger man at the front, with slicked back hair and the general's arrogant chin, leaned forward. He looked expectant, almost hungry. Mr. Grayson looked down at the paper. He read, his voice clear and sharp in the heavy silence. "To my only granddaughter." The room didn't just get quiet. It ceased to exist. The air became a solid, heavy block. Every breath stopped. Every tiny rustle, every metallic click of a phone. Everything vanished. It was a vacuum. And then, as one, every single head in that room swiveled. It wasn't a slow turn. It was a sharp, synchronized, animalistic movement. They all turned and stared directly at me. Me, in the back row, behind the plant. I felt it like a physical blow. It wasn't just eyes. It was a wave of pure, unadulterated shock, followed instantly by suspicion, by sharp, naked contempt. My skin prickled, a hot flush crawling up my neck. I felt like I was pinned to the wall, a specimen under a microscope, dozens of lasers, and every single one was set to kill. I stared back, my mind blank with confusion. Granddaughter? What granddaughter? Mr. Grayson looked up, over the top of his glasses. He didn't look at the family. He looked straight at me. His expression was impossible to read. "Ms. Grant," he said. His voice cut through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel. "Carly Grant." My heart, which had been beating a steady nurse's rhythm, suddenly gave a hard, painful kick against my ribs. It felt like a fist, striking from the inside. "Ms. Grant, do you know who your biological parents are?" The world tilted. The carpet, the walls, the angry faces. They all blurred. This wasn't a will reading. This was an ambush. This was an interrogation. My throat clamped shut. The air I was trying to breathe felt like ash. Why? Why was he asking me this? Here? Now? In front of them? My past was mine. It was a locked box, buried deep, and he had just put a key in the lock and turned it. Before I could find a voice, before I could even form a thought, the man with the general's chin surged to his feet. His expensive, heavy chair scraped against the hardwood floor with a sound like a scream. "What in God's name is this? Grayson?" he snarled. His face was turning a blotchy, furious red. Veins stood out on his neck. "This is a private family matter. She's just the nurse. She was staff. Why are you dragging this person into family business?" He spat the word person like it was something foul he wanted to scrape off his shoe. His outburst broke the spell. The room exploded. It wasn't shouting, not yet. It was a sudden eruption of angry, high-pitched whispers. I knew it. Absolutely scandalous. He was senile. He must have been. The nerve of this girl, showing up here. A gold digger. "Ms. Grant?" Mr. Grayson repeated. He was the calm eye of the storm. He ignored the family completely. He was waiting for my answer. All eyes snapped back to me, waiting, judging. I tried to speak. My mouth was dry, full of cotton. I managed. My voice was a thin, unfamiliar croak. I swallowed, hard. "I only knew my mother." The admission felt like a betrayal, a secret kept safe for 29 years, suddenly thrown into a tank of sharks. "I never knew my father," I stammered, hating the tremor in my voice, hating the way it made me sound weak, guilty. My birth certificate. There's information missing. A collective, audible gasp. It wasn't sympathy, it was confirmation. The whispers grew louder, more certain, more vicious. I had just confirmed their worst fears, or perhaps their greatest hopes. I had just handed them the ammunition they needed to paint me as a fraud. That will be all for now, Mr. Grayson suddenly boomed, his voice gaining a hard, authoritative edge. The family quieted, though they looked like a pack of wolves being told to wait. The public reading of the will is concluded. People started to stand, a rustle of expensive fabrics, the click of purses, but their eyes, their cold, furious eyes, never left me. I felt like prey. I stood up, my only thought to get out, to run, to get back to the hospital, back to the sterile, logical world of the night shift. As I tried to slip out the door, blending back into the wallpaper, Mr. Grayson caught my eye. Ms. Grant, please stay. It wasn't a request. It was an order. He lowered his voice as I hesitantly approached the massive table. The family was lingering, pointedly gathering their coats and briefcases slowly, trying to listen in. The general, Mr. Grayson said, his voice just for me, was very specific. He was very specific in his instructions regarding you. The way he said it, the gravity in his tone, sent a chill straight through my wool uniform and into my bones. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a book or a coin. I was being dragged into a game I didn't understand, a battle I wasn't prepared for. I stood there, frozen. As I waited for the family to leave, I watched their faces as they filed past. I'm a nurse. I have seen grief in all its forms. I know what it looks like. It's hollowed-out eyes. It's a tremble in the hands you can't control. It's a deep, bone-weary sadness. There was none of that in this room. I saw anger, pure, unfiltered, white-hot rage. I saw frustration. I saw calculation. They looked like a board of directors that had just watched a hostile takeover implode. Their plan, whatever it was, had just been completely derailed. And I, somehow, was the one who had done it. A palpable, heavy sense of danger settled in the room. It was thick and suffocating. They weren't just angry, they were threatened. The man who had shouted, Gavin Cole, was the last to leave. He paused at the door, blocking my exit. He was tall, soft in the way that only expensive food and no real labor can make a man. He leaned in, and I was hit with the scent of expensive cologne and stale coffee. His voice was a low, vicious hiss, meant only for me. I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing. Nurse, I flinched. But whatever you think you're doing, he whispered. You're not family, you are not a Cole, and you will not get one single thing. We'll see you in court. We'll see you in hell. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just stood there, my heart hammering against my ribs. He sneered, then turned and was gone. I left the conference room, my legs feeling unsteady. The hostile stares of the entire Cole family, now gathered in the lobby, followed me down the hall. They felt like they were burning holes in the back of my old blue uniform. I pushed open the door to the smaller office Mr. Grayson had pointed to. The heavy door clicked shut behind me, sealing me in. And I knew, in that instant, with a cold, terrifying certainty, I had just crossed a line. It was an invisible line, one that had been drawn in this family's history decades before I was born, and there was no going back. There was no way to return to the simple, quiet life I had before I walked through that door. Mr. Grayson's question echoed in the small, silent office as I waited for him to return. Do you know who your biological parents are? It wasn't just a question, it was a spade, striking the hard-packed earth my mother, Emily Grant, had spent her entire life tamping down, the polished veneer of the law office, the smell of old leather and floor wax. Suddenly dissolved, it was replaced by a different memory, a different smell, the sharp tang of industrial bleach, the faint scent of motor oil, and the sweet, dusty smell of cheap hot cocoa mix. I grew up in Glenford, a town just big enough to have a stoplight, in a small, cramped apartment. It was on the second floor, perched precariously above a two-bay auto repair shop. My childhood was scored by the sound of pneumatic wrenches screaming and the low, constant rumble of engines on the lift below us. It was always just the two of us, me and my mom. My mother was a woman defined by her tiredness. Her face was always pale, etched with fine lines of worry that seemed to belong to someone twice her age. Her hands were a roadmap of her life. She was a cleaner. She cleaned offices. She cleaned the local high school. And eventually, she cleaned the clinic. Her hands were always red, the knuckles split open and raw from the harsh chemicals she used. She smelled of bleach and ammonia, a sterile, sharp scent that clung to her clothes and hair and could never quite mask the bone-deep exhaustion. But there was no violence in our home, not a single raised hand, not one truly angry word. Our life was poor, but it was not harsh. She was never cruel. Those hands, as chapped and rough as they were always gentle, every single night. No matter how late her shift, she would come into my room. I would pretend to be asleep, but I'd listen to her quiet footsteps on the creaking floor. She would set a mug of hot cocoa, made with water from the kettle, on my bedside table. It was our ritual. It was her way of saying we were safe, that we were okay, without ever needing the words. She was my entire world, my fortress against whatever was outside our small apartment. I must have been 7 or 8 when I first asked. It was after a Father's Day art project at school. I had drawn a picture of the mailman. "Mom, where's my dad?" She didn't freeze, or cry, or get angry. She just kept stirring the pot of spaghetti sauce, her back to me. She was silent for a long, heavy moment. Then she turned, wiping her raw hands on her apron. She had this faint, sad smile she always used when she was delivering a small, hard piece of news. "He wasn't ready to be a father. Carly," she said, her voice soft and final. "That's all. It's just us. You have me, and I have you. That's enough, isn't it?" It was the first brick in the wall. The answer was so complete, so devoid of detail, that it told me, even at that age, not to ask again, and I didn't. The wall held firm until I was 12. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon, the kind where the sky is a low, gray ceiling. Mom was at work. I was bored, looking for my old watercolor paints. I was rummaging in the back of her closet, a place I wasn't really supposed to be. It smelled of her, of soap and bleach and a faint trace of mothballs. Behind a stack of old threadbare towels, my fingers hit something cold and metal. It was a small tin box, the kind that holiday cookies come in, the festive paint on the lid flaking off. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled it out and sat on the floor. The rain drumming on the roof above me, I lifted the lid. It wasn't much, a single lock of baby hair, pale blonde, tied with a brittle blue ribbon, a faded photograph of a smiling woman I didn't recognize, and at the bottom, a small plastic hospital bracelet, the kind they put on newborns. I picked it up. The plastic had yellowed with age. The tiny white beads used to spell out the name were gray with dust. I held it up to the weak light from the window, and I read the name, typed onto the tiny, fragile strip of paper inserted inside the plastic. Eleanor Grace Cole. It wasn't my name. My name was Carly Grant. I knew my name. I stared at it, turning the syllables over in my head. Eleanor Grace Cole. It felt strange on my tongue, even in my thoughts. A mistake. I didn't hear her come in. The rain and the noise from the garage below must have covered the sound of her footsteps on the stairs. The first I knew she was home was when a shadow fell over me. I looked up. My mother was standing in the closet doorway. Her face was not just pale, it was white, bloodless. Her eyes were fixed on the tiny bracelet in my hand, wide with a kind of stark, animal terror I had never seen before. "What are you doing?" Her voice was a hoarse whisper. Before I could answer, she lunged. She didn't push me. She wasn't violent, but her movement was fast and desperate. She snatched the bracelet from my hand, her rough fingers scraping my palm. She grabbed the tin box, slammed the lid shut, and clutched it to her chest as if it were burning her. "It was a clerical error," she said, her voice sharp, clipped. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the wall, at a crack in the plaster. "A mistake at the hospital. They gave me the wrong box, the wrong papers. That's all." "But Mom," I started, "the name." "Do not dig up the past. Carly!" The words hit me like a slap, more shocking than any physical blow could have been. My mother had never yelled at me, not like that. "There is nothing there for you," she said, her voice trembling with a terrifying mix of anger and fear. "It doesn't help anything. It's forgotten. Do you understand me? It is forgotten." She shoved the box deep into the pocket of her work coat and walked out of the room. The conversation was over. The wall was back up, higher and thicker than before. That night, I pretended to be asleep. The wall between our bedrooms was thin as paper. I heard her on the phone, the old rotary phone in the kitchen. Her voice was so low I could barely make it out, a desperate, pleading whisper. "He can't know. I told you. Never." There was a long pause. I held my breath. "No," she whispered, fiercely. "We're never coming back. Don't call this number again." And then, just before the click, I heard two words, clear as a bell in the silent apartment. "The Cole. Family." A pause. "No, never going back." The hard, final click of her hanging up the phone. I lay awake for hours, the name Cole echoing in my head, connecting itself to the bracelet, Eleanor Grace Cole. After that day, the wall my mother had built became my wall, too. I learned that family was a word that applied to other people. We never visited grandparents. We never got Christmas cards from aunts or uncles. There were no family photos on our walls, no heirlooms, no stories of back when, the entire history of the Grant family. It seemed began and ended in that small apartment. It was just the two of us, a two-person island. The chemicals that had cracked her hands eventually found their way into her lungs. It started as a cough she couldn't shake. Then it became something more, a deep, fibrous scarring that the doctors at the Glenford Clinic finally put a name to. Interstitial lung disease, a slow, progressive, irreversible suffocation, caused, the doctor said, by long-term exposure to industrial cleaning solvents. I was 19. I dropped out of my community college classes and enrolled in the nursing program. I don't know if I did it to save her, or just to understand the words the doctors were saying. I think I just needed to do something. I joined the Army Reserve to help pay for it. Our roles reversed. I went to classes during the day and worked as a certified nursing assistant at night, then came home to care for her. I set up her oxygen concentrator. I administered her breathing treatments. I sat with her, and we watched old movies. The hiss of the oxygen machine, our new soundtrack. We were still that island, but the tide was rising fast. The storm was no longer on the horizon. It was breaking right on top of us. In her last days, at the hospice wing, the same one where I would later care for General Cole, the morphine made her talk. She drifted. "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered, her eyes, clouded with medication, finding mine. Her voice was a dry rattle. "I'm so sorry. I couldn't tell you everything. Protect me from what?" "Mom?" I begged, the 12-year-old in the closet again. "What happened?" "I was trying to protect you," she breathed. "It was the only way." "Protect me from who?" But she just shook her head. A small, tired movement. The day she died. The hospital chaplain handed me her old, worn-out Bible. Tucked inside the front cover, on a torn piece of notepad paper, was her handwriting. It was shaky, almost illegible. "Forgive me. Don't find them. Save yourself." After the funeral, after the small, quiet service attended by me and 3 of her co-workers, I went back to the apartment. I cleaned it out, packing our small, isolated life into cardboard boxes, and I looked for the tin box. I tore the closet apart. I went through every drawer, every cupboard. It was gone. She must have thrown it away years ago, or maybe, in one of her last, lucid moments, she had destroyed it. She had taken the last, tiny piece of Eleanor Grace Cole and erased her from the world. I left Glenford and never looked back. I went active duty for a few years. A medic. I liked the structure, the rules. I liked that in the Army. No one asks about your past. Your life starts the day you put on the uniform. When I came back to the civilian world, to the night shift, I kept that mentality. I poured everything I had into my work, the long hours, the codes, the chaos. I used the exhaustion to fill that hole inside me, the one shaped like a question mark. The feeling of being an answer to a question no one was allowed to ask. The smell of leather and floor wax rushed back in. I was in the small office, sitting on a hard, unforgiving chair. I was Carly Grant. But Mr. Grayson's question had acted like an earthquake. It had shaken the very foundations of that name. The foundations my mother had built with her silence, her exhaustion, and her love. He had just confirmed what I had spent my entire adult life trying to ignore. The clerical error wasn't an error at all. My mother hadn't just been hiding from something. She had been hiding me. And the family she had warned me to save myself from. I had just met them. They were in the hallway. The door clicked shut. The sound unnervingly final. The noise from the hallway, the angry, aristocratic braying of the Cole family, was instantly muffled, reduced to a dull, agitated thrum. The contrast made the small consulting room feel even more sterile, more silent. It felt less like a sanctuary and more like a holding cell. Mr. Grayson didn't sit. He walked past me, his tall, thin frame moving with a lawyer's deliberate economy. He placed his leather binder on the small, polished table that separated us, but he didn't open it. Instead, he picked up a slim, light blue file folder that was already sitting there. It looked innocuous, like something you'd get from a dentist's office. He opened it. He didn't say a word. He just turned it around and slid it across the table toward me. It was a photocopy, a standard state document, a certificate of live birth. My heart didn't just kick this time. It stalled. The blood in my veins turned to ice. I didn't need to read the whole thing. The names leaped off the page, as if printed in bright red ink. Box 1, name of child, Eleanor Grace Cole. Box 5, mother's name, Emily Ann Cole. Box 7, father's name, left blank. I stared at the words, my breath trapped in my chest, the hospital bracelet, the cookie tin, the whispers in the dark, my mother's raw, terrified face. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a clerical error. It was real. It was on a legal document, locked in a state archive for almost 30 years. Eleanor Grace Cole, I whispered. The name felt thick and strange on my tongue, like a language I didn't know how to speak. She called me Carly. She changed her name to Grant. Yes, Mr. Grayson said, his voice flat, purely informational. She did. Immediately after she left Ridgefield, she must have wanted a clean break. I looked up from the paper, my mind reeling. But the general, how did he even know I existed? He didn't, Grayson said. Not for certain, not for a long time. He knew his sister, Ava, had a daughter named Emily. He knew Emily had a child, and then he knew they both vanished after a terrible falling out with the family, specifically with his older brother, Charles. He paused, steepling his long fingers. The general, as you know, spent the last few months of his life at the Ridgefield Veterans Care Center, where you work. I was his nurse, I said, confused. He was my patient. Indeed. About 4 months ago, you were assigned to his case. He was a very observant man, Ms. Grant. He told me he was struck by something in your face, a resemblance, a memory of his sister, Ava. I felt a chill. He had watched me, in all those long nights. While I was checking his IVs and monitoring his breathing, he had been studying me. It was a wild guess, Grayson continued. A dying man's hope, perhaps, but he was a general. He didn't guess. He confirmed. He had me, through private channels. Access your employee file. your hiring at a federal care center, especially with your military background, meant you had a comprehensive background check, and your birth date, it matched. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. It was enough for him to act. He requested a DNA test, not from you. He knew you'd never agree, and it would raise alarms. He had me retrieve his sister Ava's personal effects from the family vault. Her hairbrush, some old letters. We had a full genetic profile run. Then, he simply collected a sample from you. My mind flashed back. An accidental spill. The general knocking a cup of water onto my arm, me grabbing a towel to clean us both up. The towel, I whispered, horrified. The towel, Grayson confirmed, with no emotion. The lab results came back 2 months ago. You are, without any scientific doubt, the daughter of Emily Cole and the granddaughter of Ava Cole, the general's sister. He let that sit in the air. I wasn't just a stranger, I was his grandniece. Wait, no. His first words in the conference room. But you read? I stammered. You said, my only granddaughter. I did. That doesn't make sense. If Ava was his sister, that would make him my great-uncle. Mr. Grayson looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something. Pity? No, it was just deep, professional gravity. Eleanor, he said, and the use of that name was a shock. Your mother, Emily Cole. Her father's name was never listed. The man who was your grandfather was General Everett Cole. The room went silent. The floor dropped out from beneath me. The muffled sounds of the Cole family faded away. My mother? And her uncle? No, that wasn't right. The timeline. His sister, Ava, I started, my head spinning. No, Ms. Grant, Grayson corrected, seeing my confusion. I apologize. I am being unclear. Let me be precise. The general had one sister, Ava, and one brother, Charles. Ava had a daughter, Emily, your mother. Okay, I said, trying to follow the map. So Ava is my grandmother. The general is my great-uncle. That is what the world knew, Grayson said. That is what the general himself believed. Until he started digging, the story in the family was that your mother, Emily, was the result of a brief, unfortunate affair Ava had in college, a child born out of wedlock, a disgrace that Charles, the family patriarch, never let Ava forget. He took a breath. The general's DNA test proved something else entirely, something only 2 people knew. Your grandmother, Ava, lied to protect her brother. Your grandfather was Everett Cole. He was my grandfather? Yes, not your great-uncle. Before he was a general, before he was married, he had a relationship with a woman the family did not approve of, a woman who died. They had one child, a daughter, Emily, your mother. I sank back in the chair. But why did his sister, Ava, raise her? Because Everett Cole was a young officer, building a career, and his brother Charles convinced him that a child born of that union, a child with no mother, would be a stain, a career ender. So Ava, his sister, stepped in. She raised Emily as her own. She claimed Emily was her daughter, taking the family's shame upon herself to protect her brother's future. Everett Cole went on to become a general, and Ava and Emily, they were pushed to the side. He did not, to my knowledge, have any other children. My only granddaughter, I whispered. It wasn't a lie. It was the truth. He only confirmed it 2 months ago, Grayson said, and it changed everything for him. He reached into his binder. This is the first twist. Ms. Grant, this is the will General Cole filed with my office 1 year ago. He held up a document. In this will, his entire estate, minus a few small bequests to his staff and some distant relatives, your cousin, Mr. Gavin Cole, for instance, was to be left to the Wounded Warrior Project, almost $14 million. You were not mentioned. I nodded. That made sense. He didn't know. And this, Grayson said, pulling out a second, newer-looking document. This is the will he signed 6 weeks ago, the will I just read. In this one, the charities receive smaller, though still significant, donations. But the bulk of the estate, the houses, the stocks, the personal effects, the contents of the Cole family trust, are left, and I quote, to my beloved and only granddaughter, Eleanor Grace Cole, also known as Carly Grant, in the hopes that she can right the wrongs my family has committed in my name. My head swam. Millions. A life I couldn't even comprehend. A life of drivers and family vaults and enemies. He must have known, I said, my voice shaking. He must have known how they would react. He more than knew, Mr. Grayson said grimly. He counted on it. He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It wasn't a legal document. It was a handwritten note. The General's familiar, spiky script. To my lawyer, it read, Grayson, when I am gone, they will fight this. They will come at her. If they do to my granddaughter what my brother Charles did to my sister Ava and my daughter Emily, you will use every weapon I have given you. Let the truth speak for me. What does that mean? I asked, my blood running cold. What did his brother do? He erased them, Grayson said, his voice hard. He used Emily's illegitimacy as a weapon to control his sister Ava and to keep Everett in his debt. And when Ava finally fled with Emily, he systematically removed them from the family history. He told Everett they had died in a car accident. The General mourned his sister and his daughter for 30 years. Until he met me, I whispered. Until he met you. Which brings us, Mr. Grayson said, his face darkening, to the third twist. He reached into a drawer and pulled out another document, this one in a crisp, white envelope. This arrived at our office, by courier, 3 days ago, 2 days after the General's death. It is also a last will and testament. The signature is, to the naked eye, a perfect match. The letterhead is correct. It is dated 2 weeks ago, 1 month after the will he left with me. I looked at him, not understanding. In this will, Mr. Grayson said, his voice like ice, you are not mentioned. The estate reverts almost entirely to the previous version. Only this time, the charitable donations are smaller. And the bequests to the family, specifically to Gavin Cole and his siblings, are significantly larger. The family, I said. The one Gavin was yelling about. The one they all believed was the real will. The one they were here to have read. They were as blindsided as you were, Ms. Grant, but for a very different reason. They thought they had already won. But it's a fake? My office's forensic analysts worked all weekend. The signature is a masterpiece of modern forgery. It's drawn, not written. It was scanned and replicated. It's worthless. But it's proof. Proof? Proof of what the General expected. That your family, he said, and the word hung in the air between us, is not just angry, they are active. They are not just hiding a secret, they are committing a crime. Someone, likely Mr. Gavin Cole, was not content to wait for his inheritance. He decided to write it himself. The realization hit me. This wasn't just about a 30-year-old secret. This was happening right now. They had tried to erase me, Eleanor Grace Cole, from the will, just as they had erased Emily and Ava from the family history. They were trying to do it again. My God, I said. I felt a wave of anger, hot and sharp, cutting through the shock, but right behind it was a cold, coiling fear. If they are willing to forge a will, to commit a federal crime, what else are they willing to do to keep this quiet? To get that money? That is the question, isn't it? Mr. Grayson said. He looked at me, his gaze steady. The Cole family hid your mother. They bullied her and your grandmother out of this city. They lied to a 4-star general for 3 decades. They have an enormous amount of motive to continue doing exactly that. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single, old-fashioned, ornate brass key. It was heavy. He placed it on the desk between us. The general left this for me to give to you. Personally, I looked at the key. It was old, intricate. He told me to give you this message, Mr. Grayson said, his voice taking on the quality of a man reciting a direct quote. He said, "When the truth I've given her makes her want to run, and she will want to run. Tell her to go to the house on the hill. Tell her the chest in the attic will give her the choice. She can stay and fight, or she can use what's inside to leave and be safe forever. It's her choice, the choice her mother never had." I stared at the key. The house on the hill, the general's estate, the house where the Cole family lived, my choice, stay or run. I closed my hand around the key. The metal was cold, and the sharp edges bit into my palm. "What do I do now?" I asked. "Now," Mr. Grayson said, standing. "You walk out of this office, and you decide." I stood up, my legs shaking. I slid the key into the pocket of my uniform. I put the copy of my birth certificate, my real birth certificate, into my purse. I walked to the door. I could hear them in the hall, their voices still raised, arguing with the receptionist. I opened the door. The hallway was full of them. They all turned. Gavin Cole was at the front, his face still that blotchy, furious red. When he saw me, his eyes narrowed into slits of pure, unadulterated hatred. I tried to walk past him, to get to the elevator. He stepped into my path. He was bigger than I remembered, his soft body imposing. "You," he hissed, his voice low and threatening, the smell of cologne and rage washing over me. "You're not family. You're nothing. You're a ghost, and you're not getting a thing. Do you hear me? Not one thing." I looked him in the eye. I didn't speak. I clutched the key in my pocket, the brass biting into my skin. I stepped around him. I walked to the elevator, their eyes burning into my back. I pushed the button. The battle wasn't just beginning, I realized. As I heard the elevator ding, it had been raging my entire life. I just hadn't known I was in it. I didn't go home. I didn't go back to the hospital. I drove for an hour. The key, a heavy, solid weight in my pocket, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I ended up in Brookridge, the old money enclave on the other side of the county. The house on the hill wasn't just a house, it was a landmark. My old sedan, with its one squealing brake and the patch of rust on the fender, felt like a dirty stray dog wandering into a thoroughbred stable. The gates to the estate were open. I drove up a long, winding driveway shaded by a tunnel of ancient oak trees, their branches so thick they blotted out the afternoon sun. The air was different here, colder, quieter, smelling of pine and damp earth. The house was a fortress, 3 stories of gray, imposing stone, covered in ivy that looked as old as the trees. It was magnificent and utterly, terrifyingly lonely. A single American flag hung at half-mast on a tall white pole, the fabric limp in the still air. I parked behind a black Range Rover that was probably Gavin's. I sat there for a full 5 minutes, my hand on the ignition, ready to put the car in reverse and flee. The general's words, relayed by Mr. Grayson, came back to me. "When the truth I've given her makes her want to run." He was right. I wanted to run, but I also had the key. I got out of the car. My footsteps on the gravel driveway sounded like gunshots in the silence. I walked up the wide stone steps and stood in front of a pair of massive wooden doors. Before I could even find a doorbell, one of the doors opened with a heavy, soundless swing. A woman stood in the entryway. She was older, in her late 60s perhaps, with a sharp, kind face and intelligent blue eyes. She wore a simple black dress, but it wasn't a uniform. She looked at me, and her gaze was not like the others. It wasn't hostile. It was heavy, filled with a kind of sad recognition. "You must be Ms. Grant," she said. Her voice was soft, with a faint Irish lilt. Yes. I'm Carly. I was the general's nurse. I know who you are, she said, and a small, sad smile touched her lips. I am Mrs. Nolan. I was the general's housekeeper for over 25 years. She stepped back, holding the door wide. He would be so glad you came. He knew. One day, you would come back. Come back? I said, stepping into the massive, echoing foyer. I've never been here. Of course you haven't, she said, as if that made perfect sense. She looked at me, really looked at me, and her eyes filled with a sudden, surprising warmth. But he knew you'd find your way here, all the same. She didn't lead me to the sitting room or the study. She just started walking toward the grand, sweeping staircase. Mr. Grayson called ahead. He said you had the key. The attic is this way. The family is not here, by the way. They are at the club, I imagine, arguing over what to do about you. You know? I asked, my voice small in the vast, marble-floored space. Ms. Grant, she said, pausing at the foot of the stairs. I have lived in this house for almost 30 years. There is nothing I don't know. The general. He was a good man, but he was part of a very complicated family. He talked to me, a great deal, in these last months, especially after he met you. She started climbing, and I followed, my functional shoes squeaking on the polished wood. The second floor was a long gallery. The walls were a museum of the Cole family, just as the law office had been. Photos of the general's parents, stern and unsmiling. Photos of garden parties from the 1950s, the women in wide dresses. Photos of the general's brother, Charles, a man with a heavy face and cold, assessing eyes. Photos of a young Gavin and his siblings, all in matching polo shirts. I scanned every picture as we walked. I was looking for a ghost. I was looking for a smiling young woman I didn't recognize. I was looking for a little girl with my mother's face. There was no one. It was as if an entire branch of the family tree had been sawed off and burned. We reached a small, narrow doorway at the end of the hall. Mrs. Nolan opened it to a cramped, steep set of stairs. The attic, she said. He had me bring the chest down from the loft. It's waiting for you. He knew I'd come today? He knew Mr. Grayson would give you the key, she said. And he knew you. She's a soldier, Nolan. He told me. She won't run from a fight, even one she doesn't know she's in. He was very proud of you. The words hit me. Proud? A man who didn't even know me? He left this for you, as well, she said, handing me a small sealed envelope. He said to give it to you when you arrived. I'll be downstairs. You take all the time you need, dear. She turned and descended, her footsteps fading, leaving me alone at the entrance to the past. I climbed the narrow stairs. The air grew warmer, thick with the smell of dry wood, dust, and something else. Cedar and old paper. The attic was vast, spanning the entire length of the house. The ceiling sloped sharply, and the only light came from a single, round window at the far end, dust motes dancing in the pale beam. The floor was covered in draped furniture, old trunks, dress forms, and boxes, and right in the middle of the floor, as if placed on a stage, was the chest. It was just as Grayson had described, a heavy, dark oak chest, bound with brass, and on the front, a large, ornate brass lock. I stood there for a long time, just looking at it. My heart was pounding, a heavy, dull rhythm against my ribs. I was afraid. I was terrified of what was inside. Terrified that it would prove everything. Terrified that it would prove nothing. Stay or run. I reached into my pocket. My fingers closed around the cold, heavy key. It slid from my pocket. My hand was shaking as I inserted it into the lock. It was stiff, but it turned. A heavy, satisfying thunk echoed in the dusty silence. I took a deep breath. I lifted the heavy lid. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Lavender and old paper. And the first thing I saw was a face. It was a black and white photograph, in a simple silver frame, lying right on top of a stack of folded blankets. It was a young woman, maybe 20 years old. She was sitting on a park bench, her hair in a fashionable 1950s style. And she was smiling. No, she was beaming, a huge, unguarded, radiant smile that lit up her entire face. My breath caught. I picked up the frame. I knew that smile. It was the smile I saw in the mirror every single morning, when I was tired, and I'd catch myself in a rare, unguarded moment. It was my mother's smile. It was my smile. I turned the photo over, scrawled on the back in faded blue ink, Ava, 1956. Before the boys caught her, Ava Cole, my grandmother, the woman who had claimed my mother as her own. My hands were trembling now. I set the photo aside, carefully. Beneath the blankets was a stack of letters, tied with a faded red ribbon. Dozens of them. They were in thin, airmail envelopes, addressed to Captain Everett Cole, at an APO address. The return address was just A. Cole, Brookridge. I untied the ribbon. I pulled out the first letter. Dearest Everett, I hope this finds you well. I pray for you every night. Things here are the same as always. Charles is impossible. Mother and father think he walks on water, just because he's bringing money into the family. He told father I am useless, and that my only job is to find a rich husband to add to the family's assets, as if I am a piece of property. Sometimes I think you are the only one who sees me as a person. I sat on the dusty floor, my legs tucked under me, and I read. I read for an hour, letter after letter. I watched a story unfold, the story of a deep, loving bond between a brother and a sister, separated by a war, and by a family that didn't value her. I felt a wave of love for this woman I'd never met. Then I reached a different stack. Under the first one, these weren't airmail. They were in heavy cream-colored envelopes, the kind that were hand-delivered. The handwriting was the same, Ava's, but it was different, rushed, messy. I opened the first one. It was dated almost 10 years after the others. Everett, I don't know if you'll get this. I don't know if I'm even safe sending it. He's trying to take her from me. Charles. He knows Emily isn't mine. Everett, I don't know how, but he knows. And he knows. He knows the truth about you. He's using it. He told me if I don't sign over my shares in the family trust, he will have Emily put in a proper home. He said he'd have her declared a ward of the state. He'd tell everyone the truth. He's a monster. My blood ran cold. My mother. He had threatened to take my mother. I found the next letter. It was shorter. I'm doing it. I'm signing everything over to him. It's just money. He can have it. But I'm taking Emily, and I'm leaving. I'm leaving. Everett, tonight, don't look for us. Please, if he knows you're looking, he'll find us. He'll never let go if he knows she exists. He'll never let go of his leverage over you. Be safe. Be the general. Forget us. We're ghosts now. Love, Ava. I sat there, stunned, the letter shaking in my hand. My mother. She had been a pawn, a piece of leverage. This was the choice my grandmother had made. She gave up everything, the money, the family, the name, to save her child, to save my mother. At the bottom of the chest, under the letters, was a thin manila folder. It looked official. I opened it. It was a copy of an internal military report, dated 30 years ago. The letterhead was from the Coal and Veterans Foundation, the very charity Mr. Grayson had mentioned. The report detailed an internal audit, one that had found a discrepancy, an embezzlement, a sum of $50,000, moved from the foundation's general fund into an offshore account. I scanned the document, my nurse's brain kicking in, looking for the key detail, and I found it, the signature on the authorization form, the person who had approved the transfer, Emily A. Cole, my mother. I felt sick. My mother? A criminal? And then I saw it. Tucked into the corner of the page, in the general's familiar, spiky handwriting, a single note, written in red ink. Emily was forced to sign. I have proof. It was Charles Jr. who moved the money. He used my daughter to cover his tracks. Charles Jr., Gavin's father. I dropped the report. It all came crashing down on me. My mother hadn't just been threatened. She'd been used. She'd been set up. They had made her a criminal. This was why she ran. This was why she became Emily Grant. This was why she lived in an apartment above a garage, scrubbing floors until her lungs gave out. She wasn't just hiding from the family. She was hiding from a prison sentence. They had used her, and then thrown her away, leaving her to hold the bag. I thought I couldn't be more shocked. I was wrong. At the very bottom of the chest, there was one last thing, a small, black cassette tape. The label was handwritten, in the general's script, "The Last Night with Emily." My hands were numb. I found an old Walkman in a box of 80s memorabilia nearby. I didn't know if it would work. I put the tape in. I pressed play. A hiss, a click, and then a voice. The general's, old, tired, but the same one I knew from the hospital. I am leaving this, in case I am not, in case I don't have the courage to tell her myself. I found her, after 30 years, after Charles died. I found them, Emily, my daughter, living in a place called Glenford. She's a cleaner. His voice broke, a long, shuddering sigh. I went to her. I drove to that apartment. I knocked on her door. She opened it, and she knew me. After all this time, she still had Ava's eyes. I begged her to come home. I told her Charles was gone. I told her I would give her everything. I would restore her name. I would be her father. Another pause, and she said no. The tape hissed, and then I heard her voice. My mother's, younger, but the same. The voice that used to read me stories. "No, you can't. You don't get to. Where were you when I was a child? Where were you when Ava was dying? Where were you when your brother, your family, forced me to sign those papers? You were becoming a general. You were protecting the Cole name, that name." Her voice was full of a quiet, steel-hard rage I had never heard. "That name is a cage, and I will not put my daughter in it. I will not let you people turn her into a bargaining chip. She will be poor, maybe, but she will be free. She will not be a Cole." The tape clicked. It was over. I sat on the floor of the dusty attic, the headphones still on, and I wept. I cried for the grandmother I never knew. I cried for the mother who had given up a fortune to give me a life. I cried for the little girl, Eleanor Grace Cole, who had been erased, and my anger, that hot, sharp anger from the law office, it was still there, but it had changed. It was no longer directed at my mother. I finally understood her note. "Forgive me. Don't find them. Save yourself." She wasn't asking for forgiveness for hiding the past. She was asking for forgiveness for not being able to protect me from it forever. The anger was now cold. It was hard. It was for them, for the system of adults, for Charles, for Gavin, for all of them. They had used my mother. They had used my grandmother. They had used me, a child who wasn't even born, as a number, a piece of leverage. The general was wrong. The chest didn't give me a choice to stay or to run. I closed the lid of the chest. It thudded shut. I stood up, wiping my tears on the sleeve of my uniform. They had buried my mother under a false name and a forged crime. They had buried my grandmother in silence. This truth wasn't too big to be buried. It was too big not to unearth. This wasn't a choice. It was a duty. I had the report. I had the letters. I had the tape. The general hadn't just left me a choice. He had left me an entire arsenal. The call came from Mr. Grayson's office 2 days later. It was a formal request, delivered via email to the address I'd given his secretary. He was holding a second meeting with the Cole family. As the primary beneficiary and a confirmed blood relative, the email read, "Your presence is required." I walked into that conference room for the second time, but I was not the same person. I wasn't wearing my uniform. I was wearing a simple pair of black slacks and a plain blue blouse, the best I owned. But it wasn't about the clothes. I was no longer the confused, terrified nurse. I was a woman holding an arsenal. My purse felt heavy, not with the cassette tape. I couldn't risk bringing the original, but with the photocopies of Ava's letters and the military report. My phone had a digital recording of the tape, a backup Mr. Grayson had made for me when I'd met him in secret yesterday. They were all there, seated around the long mahogany table as if they were posing for a dark, unhappy family portrait. They had brought more people this time. Lawyers, at least 3 of them. Sharp-eyed men in $1,000 suits, all sitting slightly behind Gavin Cole, who was positioned at the head of the table like a petulant king. The moment I walked in, every conversation stopped. The silence was a blade. Gavin let out a low, theatrical sigh. He didn't look at me, but spoke to the man next to him, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "How long do you suppose she's going to play this Cinderella role? It's really quite pathetic." A woman I hadn't met, an aunt with a face like a dried apple, leaned toward her neighbor. "That's her?" she whispered, a harsh, stage whisper. The product of that shameful business with Emily? She has the look of that side of the family. So common. I ignored them. I walked to the chair Mr. Grayson indicated, right at his side, directly opposite Gavin. I sat down, placed my hands on the table, and met Gavin's stare. His eyes were cold, but I saw something new in them. Not just anger, a flicker of anxiety. He had been so sure of himself last time, so certain of his forgery. He had no idea what I'd found in the attic. Mr. Grayson stood. He was all business. "We are here," he began, his voice filling the room, "to resolve the matter of General Cole's estate. There seemed to be some misunderstandings. Let me be perfectly clear. For the record," he put on his glasses. "Fact 1, DNA analysis, commissioned by General Cole himself and cross-referenced with genetic material from his late sister, Ava Cole, proves that Ms. Carly Grant is the biological granddaughter of General Cole." A low murmur went through the room. One of the lawyers scribbled on a pad. "Fact 2, Grayson continued. "We have here a certified copy of Ms. Grant's birth certificate, born Eleanor Grace Cole, mother, Emily Cole, father, General Everett Cole." This time, the murmur was a gasp. The dried apple aunt, Marjorie, put a hand to her pearls. "Emily? Everett's daughter? That's impossible. She was Ava's." "It is the truth, Marjorie," Grayson said, his voice sharp. A truth the general confirmed himself. Which brings us to fact 3. The documents, letters, and audio recordings recovered from the general's private chest prove, unequivocally, that Ava Cole raised Emily as her own to protect her brother's career, and that both Ava and Emily were driven from this family by the actions of the late Charles Cole Sr. He had laid the foundation, stone by stone. He had built a fortress of facts around me. Gavin, however, just sneered. He was arrogant. He thought he had the ace. "That's all a very touching story, Grayson," Gavin said, leaning back in his chair. A picture of corporate confidence. A real tearjerker. A secret daughter. A long-lost grandchild. It would make a great movie, but it's irrelevant. It's fiction, and it doesn't change a thing. He nodded to one of his lawyers. The man stood and placed a document in front of Mr. Grayson. "What is relevant?" Gavin said, his voice smug. "Is this the general's actual final will, dated 2 weeks ago, 1 month after your fabricated document? I believe you've already received a copy." Gavin smiled. A thin, reptilian smile. "In this will, the true will, my grandfather, being of sound mind and body, leaves his entire estate to be divided equally among his living, known grandchildren. That means me and my siblings, not her." He waved a dismissive hand in my direction. "He must have had a moment of senile weakness when he met with you, Grayson, but he clearly recovered his senses and corrected his mistake. This is his final word. Case closed." Mr. Grayson looked at the document. Then he looked at Gavin, his expression unreadable. "This is, indeed, The document you had couriered to my office. You claim this is the true will? I don't claim it, Gavin said. My grandfather's signature does. It's ironclad. We are prepared to probate this will, and we will see you in court if you attempt to file your fantasy. I see. Mr. Grayson turned to the large video screen on the wall, the one used for presentations. He picked up a remote. The general was a thorough man. He anticipated discrepancies. What is this? Gavin said, his smile fading. The general, Mr. Grayson said, recorded a video message in my office on the same day he signed the will I am holding. He recorded it specifically to be shown in the event of a dispute. He was a very, very smart man. He pressed the button. The screen flickered to life, and there was the general. He looked exactly as I remembered him from the hospital. Gaunt, pale, his uniform hanging off his skeletal frame, but his eyes were burning. They were clear and sharp and full of a cold, controlled fury. He was sitting in this very room, his voice, thinned by illness, but still carrying the command of a 4-star general, filled the speakers. This message is for my family, he said. He stared directly into the camera. He looked like a hanging judge. I am of sound mind and body, and I have just signed my final will. In it, I have left the bulk of my estate to my only granddaughter, Eleanor Grace Cole, the child of my daughter, Emily, the granddaughter you all allowed my brother to erase. The family members flinched. I know my family, the general continued, his voice dripping with ice. I know what you are capable of. I know that my brother, Charles, and his son, Charles Jr., built their fortunes on lies, theft, and intimidation. I know that legacy of greed is alive and well. Gavin's face had gone from smug to pale to a blotchy, furious red. So I will say this only once, the general snarled. If, after my death, any other document is presented, if any will surfaces that does not have my granddaughter's name in it, if any of you, Gavin, and he said the name, a verbal stab, try to claim I was senile or coerced, you will know that document is a fraud, and you will be proving to the world that you are not just greedy, but you are criminals. You are willing to defraud a dying man. You are thieves, and I will, from the grave, see you exposed. The video cut to black. The silence in the room was absolute. It was so total, I could hear the buzz of the fluorescent lights. Every eye in the room, including those of his own lawyers, swiveled to look at Gavin. He looked like he had been struck. He was pale, sweating, his mouth opening and closing with no sound. He was being manipulated, Gavin stammered. He was sick. He didn't know what he was saying. On the contrary, Mr. Grayson said, his voice quiet but sharp. He knew exactly what he was saying, which brings me to this. He pressed another button. An image appeared on the screen. It was 2 signatures, side by side. One was labeled General Cole, Authentic Signature, 2024. The other was Challenged Will Signature, 2025. Our forensic team, Mr. Cole, had a very busy weekend. As you can see, the T in Everett on the authentic signature has a very distinct, sharp, downward-pulling cross, but on your will, he used a laser pointer. The T is drawn. It's hesitant. It has the microscopic hooks of a traceover. The pressure on the O in Cole is unnaturally even. This signature wasn't written. It was drawn, badly. He clicked to the next slide, a 30-page report. The full forensic analysis. This, Mr. Cole, is not a will. It is a confession. It is a felony. I had no... Gavin was sputtering, looking to his lawyers, who were staring, stone-faced, at the screen. They were watching their fees evaporate. And that was my cue. Before Gavin could recover, I spoke. My voice was low, but it cut through the room. They had practice, I said. All eyes snapped to me. They had practice forging signatures, or at least forcing them. I reached into my purse. I pulled out the copies of Ava's letters. I didn't slide them. I placed them in the center of the table with a firm, steady hand. "This," I said, my voice shaking, but not with fear, with rage, "is a letter from my grandmother, Ava Cole, written to her brother, Everett, the general. It's dated 1994. I looked at Gavin. I looked at Marjorie. I looked at all of them. "I'll read the relevant part," I said. I picked up the top sheet. "He's trying to take her from me, Everett, Charles. He knows Emily isn't mine, and he's using it. He told me if I don't sign over my shares in the family trust, he will have Emily put in a proper home. He said he'd have her declared a ward of the state. He's a monster." I put the paper down. The room was frozen. "My grandmother, Ava," I continued, "gave up her entire fortune, her home, and her family to save my mother from your patriarch, Charles Sr. She ran, and she hid, and she died in poverty, while all of you—" I swept my hand across the table. "Lived on the money she was blackmailed into giving you." "That's a lie!" Marjorie, the dried apple aunt, suddenly cried out. Her voice was a thin shriek. "That's a lie! Charles was a difficult man, but he would never—" "He would," I said, my gaze locking with hers. "And you knew." Her face crumpled. "No." "You were there," I said. "A guess, a shot in the dark, but I knew it was true. You saw them. You saw Ava and my mother leave, and you said nothing." Marjorie's face, a mask of socialite poise, shattered. A lifetime of silent complicity broke her. She let out a dry, gasping sob. I was young," she whispered, tears streaming down her powdered cheeks. "I was terrified of him, of Charles. He controlled everything. I saw her. Yes, I saw her packing a bag. She was crying. She was holding Emily's hand. She told me to tell Everett she loved him, but Charles told us she was unstable. He told us she'd run off. I was afraid to lose my place. I was afraid." She devolved into sobs, a horrible, racking sound. It was a confession. The entire family stared at her, horrified. She had just confirmed my story. Gavin, seeing his entire case, his entire world, collapsing, made one last, desperate lunge. He slammed his hand on the table, surging to his feet. "This is all just a story," he roared. "A one-sided, pathetic sob story. So what? So our grandfather was a bastard? So what? Where was she?" He pointed at me, his finger trembling with rage. "Where was she when we were children? Where was she for the holidays? Where was she helping him, supporting him? We were here. I was here. And where was she when he was sick? When he was dying?" The room was silent, waiting for my answer. I didn't stand. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked him, right in the eye. "When he was dying, Mr. Cole?" I said, and my voice was calm and steady, the voice of a lead nurse on the night shift. "I was with him." Gavin's face froze. "I was there," I continued, "for the 3 a.m. terrors. When he'd wake up convinced he was back in the war. I was there when he was coughing up blood, and I held the basin. I was the one who cleaned him. I was the one who managed his pain medication, titrating his morphine drip so he could be lucid, but not in agony." I looked around at the stunned, pale faces, and I was the one he talked to. In those long, long nights, when the rest of the world was asleep. He didn't talk about his money. He didn't talk about his battles. He talked about his regrets. He asked me, over and over. He asked me about my mother. He didn't know, not for sure, but he hoped. He'd grab my hand, his own so thin it felt like a bird's skeleton, and he'd say, "Tell me about her. Tell me about Emily." He was trying to find her. In me. A few of them, the younger cousins, the ones who hadn't spoken, looked down at the table, their faces flushed with a hot, unmistakable shame. I had done it. I had checkmated him. Mr. Grayson stood up, all business again. "The legal situation is this," he said, as if addressing a jury. "The will dated 6 weeks ago, naming Ms. Grant as the sole heir, is the only valid will. The evidence supporting her identity is incontrovertible. The evidence refuting the other document is forensic and absolute. You are free to contest this. You are free to take this to court. But I assure you, you will lose, and in the process, the evidence of Mr. Cole's forgery and the other family matters," he glanced at the letters, "will become public record. I strongly suggest you reconsider." It was over. The fight was gone from them. Their lawyers were already packing their briefcases, whispering to a stunned, gray-faced Gavin. He looked at me. One last time. His face was no longer red. It was a terrifying, waxy white. It was a mask of pure, undiluted hatred. He didn't speak. He just turned, shoved his chair back so hard it crashed to the floor, and stormed out of the room. His lawyers, like pilot fish, scurried after him. The rest of the family, defeated, silent, and ashamed, filed out, Marjorie still weeping into a handkerchief. I sat there, my hands still on the table, finally letting them shake. I had won. I had won the battle. I heard Gavin's voice, one last time, screaming at his lawyer in the lobby. "I don't care. You fight it. I will not let that trash from the gutter. Take the Cole name." I closed my eyes. Mr. Grayson was right. The legal and media war had only just begun. I sat alone in the kitchen. It was the old kitchen, the one Mrs. Nolan said the family hadn't used in 20 years, preferring a newer, sterile catering wing. This one was in the basement. It was vast, with a massive cast-iron stove that was cold to the touch, and a long, scrubbed pine table in the center. It was the only room in the house that felt real. The file Mr. Grayson had given me was open on the table. It was a preliminary inventory of the estate. I stared at the numbers, but my brain refused to process them. They were just abstract symbols on a page. Liquid assets, equities, real estate holdings. The total, at the bottom, was a number with so many zeros it looked like a typo. More than $10 million, not including the house, not including the trust. $10 million. I thought about my mother, her hands red and cracked, scrubbing a toilet for minimum wage. I thought about our apartment, how we'd put a pot on the floor to catch the rainwater from the leak in the ceiling. I thought about the hot cocoa, made with water because we couldn't always afford milk. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt rich. I just felt sick. What was I supposed to do with this? Buy a sports car? A yacht? The very idea was absurd. This money felt dirty. It was stained with my grandmother's fear and my mother's pain. It was the price of their silence, a price they had refused to pay. And now it had all landed in my lap. I traced the wood grain of the old table with my finger, and I remembered. It was a dream, a silly, late-night, what-if game my mom and I used to play when she was very sick. We were sitting on the worn sofa in our apartment, the hiss of her oxygen machine in the background. "If we had all the money in the world, Carly girl," she'd whispered, her voice thin, "what would we do?" I'd given the standard answer. Buy a big house, a new car, go to Hawaii. "No," she'd said, a rare spark in her tired eyes. "No, we'd build a place, a better place, and we'd sketched it out. Huddled under our one good blanket, it would be a clinic, a place for people like us, for the veterans who came into the clinic where she worked, their bodies and minds broken, only to be told their insurance wouldn't cover the therapy, for their families, for the kids, a place that wasn't a hospital, all cold and sterile, but felt like a home, a place where no one would ever be treated like a burden, a place where a child would be safe, protected, and respected, not used. It was just a dream, a fantasy spun from exhaustion and wishful thinking. But I wasn't in that apartment anymore. I was sitting in the massive, empty fortress this money had built, and suddenly, I knew exactly what to do. The anger, the cold, hard rage, It was still there, but I finally knew what to do with it. You don't just fight with anger, you build with it. The next day, I called Mr. Grayson. "I'm not selling the house," I told him. "I'm keeping it, and I'm not taking the money for myself. I'm going to use it to start a foundation." I could hear the smile in his voice. "I was hoping you'd say that, Ms. Grant. The general he would be very pleased." "I'm going to turn the mansion into a clinic," I said, the words tasting real for the first time. "A community health center, for veterans, for their families, for the elderly in this area, a place with a real clinic, physical therapy, PTSD counseling, all of it. I'm going to call it the Cole Legacy Center." Because that was the real legacy, wasn't it? Not the money, not the name, but the responsibility. I hired a firm, a young, ambitious group called Brightline Design Studio. They came in, all sharp suits and rolled-up blueprints, and I could tell they wanted to gut the place. "No," I told them, standing in the grand, echoing foyer. "You don't understand. I don't want to erase the history. I want to redeem it. We keep the woodwork, we keep the fireplaces, we keep the bones of this house. But you are going to find a way to fill it with light. I want it to feel like a home, not a hospital. I want people to feel safe here, not intimidated." The lead architect, a woman named Anna, looked at me, really looked at me, and nodded. "I get it," she said. "Warmth, not wealth. We can do that." It was during the initial structural survey, 2 weeks later, that they found it. Anna called me, her voice buzzing with excitement. "You need to get over here. The demo crew was checking the support in the old study. The one you said was Charles Sr.'s? What is it?" "He had a safe, a small one, a floor safe, hidden under a false section of the desk foundation. We opened it." When I got there, it was sitting on the floor, a small, dark metal box, its door pried open. Anna handed me a pair of rubber gloves. "The crew didn't touch what's inside. We just found it." It wasn't much, a few stacks of bonds, and 2 old, leather-bound financial ledgers. They weren't for the estate. The titles were embossed in faded gold. Cole and Veterans Foundation, private accounts, 1990-1995. I sat on the floor, in the dust of Charles Sr.'s office, and I opened the first book. It was a meticulous record, and it was a confession, line after line of donations from the foundation. Consulting fees paid to shell corporations in the Cayman Islands. Operational expenses for 5-figure sums, all signed off on by Charles Jr., Gavin's father. And then, in the second book, the dates were more recent. 2010, 2015, 2020. The handwriting changed. It was Gavin's. He had inherited his father's desk and his father's crimes. I took the ledgers straight to Mr. Grayson's office. He put on his glasses and spent 20 minutes reading, his face growing paler and grimmer with every page. "My God," he whispered, looking up. "This is it. This is the proof Ava was talking about. This isn't just a one-time embezzlement. This is systematic. Generational theft. From a veterans charity. They've been bleeding it dry for 30 years. Carly, this is a criminal case." "This is what they were really afraid of," I said. The forged will, the anger, it all making a new, darker kind of sense. It wasn't just the inheritance, it was this. This is what they're trying to protect. And this, he said, tapping the ledger, is the leverage that will end this war. But the war was already escalating. The Coles weren't just fighting me in conference rooms. They were fighting me in the press. The story broke. Just as I knew it would. Local nurse inherits $10 million fortune. The first few articles were just surprised. But then, the tone changed. Tabloids, online gossip sites, the Cinderella nurse, or a gold-digging seductress, anonymous sources. Friends of the family started talking. She preyed on a sick, old man. She isolated him from his loving family. She took advantage of his senility. My mailbox at the apartment filled with hate. My social media, which I rarely used, was a toxic sewer of threats and insults. Then, it hit my job. I was called into my supervisor's office at Harborline Medical Center. She looked uncomfortable. "Carly, I don't know how to say this." She slid a piece of paper across her desk. It was an anonymous letter, sent to the entire hospital board. It accused me of unethical behavior. It claimed I had accepted private funds from the Cole family in exchange for preferential care for the general. It suggested I had manipulated a vulnerable patient's medication for personal gain. It was slander. It was a lie, but it was on hospital letterhead, which meant someone had printed it from inside the building. "The Coles sit on half the boards in this state. Carly," my supervisor said, her voice low, "including ours. They are influential. The board is opening an internal review. An internal review, a polite way of saying I was being investigated. I was being hung out to dry. I stood at the crossroads. I could fight this. I could give Mr. Grayson the ledgers and tell him to burn the entire Cole family to the ground, ruin their reputation, send Gavin to jail, and expose them for the thieves they were. But that would mean the general's name, his legacy, would be forever tied to a massive, ugly criminal scandal. Or I could walk away. I could take the money, disappear, and let them keep their dirty secrets. Just run. Like my mother. Like my grandmother. But I thought of my mother's note. Save yourself. I finally understood. She didn't mean run. She meant save your soul. Don't become them. And I thought of the dream, the clinic, the place for veterans who had been cheated. Not just by the world, but by this very family. I knew what I had to do. I went back to my supervisor's office the next day. "I'm resigning," I said. "Carly, don't," she pleaded. "We can fight this." "I know," I said, "but not from here. I can't fight my battle and your battle at the same time. And my new project, it's going to need all of me." I handed her my badge. I walked out of Harborline Medical Center for the last time. I felt light, terrified, but light. I had just set fire to my own escape boat. There was no going back. I put all my energy into the house. I was there from dawn until dusk, working with Anna's crew. The news of my resignation spread. The story shifted. Disgraced nurse quits. Amid investigation, I was the town pariah. People whispered when I went to the grocery store. And then, one morning, I showed up at the house, and there were 3 old pickup trucks parked in the driveway. 3 men, all in their 70s, all wearing VFW hats, were standing on the porch. I recognized one of them, Mr. Henderson. He had been in the room next to the general's. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat. He was holding a toolbox. We read the papers," his friend said, "a man with a prosthetic leg. And we just don't believe a word of it. The general thought the world of you. We're not much," he said, gesturing to their old tools. "But we know how to spackle, and we heard you were building a place. For us." Another truck pulled up. A woman got out. It was the wife of another former patient. She was carrying a box full of old, donated medical supplies. "They're expired for hospital use," she said, "but they're fine for training or a free clinic that can't be picky." By noon, there were a dozen of them, veterans and their families. They brought their own tools, their own paint, their own sandwiches. They formed a small, fierce, warm circle around me. They were a network, a real family. That evening, I stood in the middle of the grand ballroom. The chandeliers were covered in drop cloths. The walls were stripped to the studs. But the room was full. It was full of laughter, and the sound of work, and the smell of coffee. I could see it. I could see the physical therapy mats where that gilded piano used to be. I could see the children's play area in the sunroom, where the Coles used to have their cocktail parties. I could see a veteran, sitting in a patch of afternoon sun, finally, talking to a therapist. I knew, in that moment, that this legacy would not be defined by the fight that was coming. It would be defined by the healing that had already begun. The quiet, purposeful work at the house lasted for almost 2 weeks. It was a brief, sunlit truce, an eye in the storm, and then the other side of the storm hit, and it hit with a fury I couldn't have braced for. Gavin Cole, true to his word, filed the lawsuit. It wasn't a quiet, behind-the-scenes legal maneuver. It was a public declaration of war. Mr. Grayson forwarded me the filing, and even I, a layperson, could understand the brutality of the language. It was a petition to have the will, my will, thrown out entirely. The grounds were a checklist of legal accusations, each one designed to paint me as a villain. Undue influence. They claimed I had used my medical position to manipulate a vulnerable, dying man. Lack of testamentary capacity. They claimed the general was senile, confused, and not in his right mind when he signed the document. Fiduciary exploitation, a more technical term for, as the tabloids had already put it, gold digging. But the filing was just the first shot. The Cole family, I learned, didn't just have lawyers. They had public relations firms. The day the suit was filed, a formal press release was sent to every major news outlet in Virginia. It was a masterpiece of spin. It was printed on the heavy cream-colored letterhead of the Cole and Veterans Foundation. "It is with a heavy heart," it began, "that the Cole family must take this drastic step to protect the true honor and legacy of General Everett Cole, our family, which has a multi-generational tradition of philanthropy and service to our nation's heroes, has been forced to act to prevent a tragic injustice." It went on to paint a picture of a beloved patriarch being exploited in his final weakest days by a predatory individual. It spoke of their sacred duty to ensure the general's assets were used as he truly intended, to be managed by the family, for the good of the community. It was a brilliant, disgusting piece of work. They weren't just greedy relatives trying to get their money back. They were now the noble protectors of a dead hero's legacy. They were the virtual charity, and I was the one trying to steal from the veterans. The lawsuit and the press release were the air war. Then, the ground war began. Anonymous accounts, with names like Cole Truth and Ridgefield Watcher, sprung up on social media. My name, Carly Grant, began to trend in our small community. They had a photo. It was a candid shot, taken weeks before I'd ever met the general. I was at the nurses' station at Harbor Line, laughing. My head was thrown back. It was probably 4 a.m, and someone had likely told a terrible, sleep-deprived joke. This picture, this moment of harmless joy, was recontextualized into something monstrous. It was posted everywhere. The caption was always the same. "The grieving nurse," just days after she supposedly met the confused general, cashing in and laughing all the way to the bank. "Gold digger elder abuse justice. For General Cole, take back the will." My private messages, my DMs, became a river of digital poison. People I had never met, people whose families I had probably cared for in the ER, sent me messages calling me a whore, a thief, a parasite. They threatened me. They told me to get out of town. I did not respond. I sat, night after night, blocking, deleting, and reporting. But it was like trying to mop up the ocean. For every account I blocked, 3 more appeared. Then came the media, a local news station, WZRV, the one with the highest ratings in the county, invited me to tell my side. They were offering a live, televised community discussion. "To ensure fairness," the producer wrote in an email, "we have also invited Mr. Gavin Cole to participate. We want to give you both an equal platform to discuss this important local issue." I showed the email to Mr. Grayson. He snorted. "An equal platform. That's not a discussion. Ms. Grant, that's a Roman circus. You're the Christian. He's the lion. You'd be walking into an ambush. You must refuse." "I know," I said, already typing my polite, firm no. "He'll go?" "Of course," Grayson added, and he was right. Gavin went, alone. I watched it, against my better judgment, on the small, flickering TV in the mansion's kitchen, surrounded by Mr. Henderson and his crew. Gavin was a revelation. He wasn't the red-faced, snarling man from the lawyer's office. He was a picture of wounded dignity. He wore a perfectly tailored dark suit. His voice was soft, cracking with just the right amount of emotion. This isn't about the money," he said, dabbing at a perfectly dry eye with a folded handkerchief. "This is about my granduncle, a man who was a father to me." A lie. To see him, in his final days, confused, isolated from the family who loved him, it's a tragedy. We're just trying to do what's right. We're trying to honor his real wishes. The public. The online comments scrolling by on my phone. They loved him. He was the grieving, honorable nephew. I, by my silence, was the cold, calculating, guilty one. The pressure was mounting. The work at the house, the donations of time and supplies, continued. But now we had a new problem. The city inspectors. Suddenly, our permits were being reviewed. A zoning complaint was filed. We were being strangled by red tape, and I knew exactly whose hands were on the other end. I was in Mr. Grayson's office. The tension in the room so thick I could barely breathe. "They are bleeding us, Carly," he said, his voice grim. He had the ledgers from Charles's safe open on his desk. "They're strangling the project. They're trying to bankrupt you, to ruin you in the court of public opinion, so that by the time we get to court, you'll look like a toxic pariah. They'll drag this out for years." "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "We use the bomb," he said, tapping the ledgers. "We stop playing defense. We hand these ledgers, these records of 30 years of criminal, generational theft, to the state attorney general. We file a countersuit, not just for the inheritance, but for racketeering. We accuse Gavin, publicly, of criminal fraud. We expose the entire Coal and Veterans Foundation." He was right. It was the logical move, the killing blow. But I hesitated. I saw the general's face, clear as day, his sad, proud eyes in the hospital, his image on the video. "If we do that," I said, "what will the headlines be? General Cole's family a criminal enterprise. Coal Foundation steals from vets. His name, Mr. Grayson, his entire legacy, his honor, it all gets buried under their scandal. I'd be doing exactly what he was afraid of. I'd be dragging his name through the mud, just to save my own." "Carly," Grayson said, his voice gentle. "He's dead. You are alive, and they are trying to destroy you." "I know, but I can't. I can't be the one to turn his life's work into a tabloid scandal. There has to be another way." "There isn't," he said, closing the book. I left his office with that terrible, impossible choice hanging over me. Destroy the general's legacy to win my fight, or protect his name and lose everything. I was sitting in my car, my head on the steering wheel, my phone buzzing with another hateful text, when an email notification popped up. The sender was an unlisted, jumbled mess of letters. The subject line, "Coal Foundation." My fingers were trembling as I opened it. I worked for Charles Jr. for 20 years, and then for Gavin. I'm sick now. I can't die with what I know. I have the real books, if you want them. Be at the public library. Reference section. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Come alone. It could be a trap. It was almost certainly a trap. Gavin, trying to set me up, to catch me in some other conspiracy. I called Mr. Grayson. "It's a trap," he said immediately. "I know," I said. "But what if it's not?" "Then you will not go alone," he said. "I'll be there, on the other side of the stacks. If you're not out in 10 minutes, I'm calling the police." The next morning, I walked into the reference section of the Ridgefield Public Library. She was sitting at a table in the back. A small, frail woman, a portable oxygen tank at her side, a mask on her face. She looked like a bird. She was terrified. I sat down. She didn't look up. She just pushed a worn brown accordion file across the table. "Mrs. Harlow?" I whispered. The name had been in some of the older ledgers, a bookkeeper. "I was a single mother," she whispered, her voice reedy, barely audible over the hiss of her oxygen. "Charles Jr. He found a mistake I made, a small one. He said he'd have me fired, have me charged, ruin me, unless I did what he said, so I did, for 25 years. "What did you do?" "I moved the money," she wept, her thin shoulders shaking. "It wasn't just taking it, it was hiding it. Charles Jr. and then Gavin. They would have these fundraisers. They'd get checks from all their rich friends. I'd enter the checks into the foundation account, and then they'd have me write another check for the same amount to a consulting company. It was a shell, a ghost. They'd get the tax write-off and their money back, all while the foundation's donation numbers looked huge. "Virtual charity," I whispered. "But that's not the worst," she said. She opened the file. She had the original bank statements, the transfer slips. She'd been photocopying them for decades. "This," she said, her finger shaking as she pointed to a line item. "This is the Clearwater Housing Project, supposedly a community for disabled vets, a huge $5 million donation." She pushed another paper toward me. It was a photo from a boating magazine. It was Gavin, on the deck of a massive, gleaming white yacht. The name on the back of the yacht was Clearwater. He used the foundation's money to buy a boat," I said, my voice thick with disgust. "And this," she said, "this Pacific Rebuilding Fund? That's his beach house in California. This Patriots Rest investment? That's his private plane." She had it all, not just the old crimes of Charles Jr. She had Gavin, cold, hard, inarguable. She pushed the file. I'm in hospice. I have a few weeks. I can't meet God. Knowing I let them steal from those boys, from those soldiers." She stood, unsteadily. "You take it, you do what's right, you make it right." She shuffled away, leaving me with the file. "Mr. Grayson was waiting by the door. I didn't say a word. I just held up the accordion file. We went back to his office. The mood was electric. This wasn't just leverage. This was a tactical nuke. And it wasn't my nuke. It was Mrs. Harlow's. "We don't go to the Attorney General," I said, the plan forming, clear and cold in my mind. "Not yet. We go to the court." Grayson was already on his computer, his fingers flying. "We file an immediate injunction, a counter-complaint. We are not just contesting their suit. We are petitioning the court for an immediate, full, and public audit of the Coal and Veterans Foundation based on new credible evidence of 3 decades of criminal fraud, misappropriation, and racketeering." He looked at me, a rare, fierce smile on his face. "This, Ms. Grant, is how you fight. You don't use a rumor, you use a subpoena." The work at the center continued. The inspectors, magically, disappeared. The threat stopped. It was as if the entire Cole family was holding its breath. The news about our counterfiling, which was public record, had spread. And the volunteers, the number doubled. Mr. Henderson and his crew were now running a full-on construction team. They knew, the whole community knew, they had been lied to, they had been stolen from, and they were, in their own quiet way, choosing a side. I stood there, watching them frame a new, accessible doorway. I realized my revenge wasn't about the money, it wasn't about the name, it was this. It was watching the people Gavin and his father had stolen from build the very thing the Coles had only pretended to care about. The real revenge wasn't destroying them with violence. It was exposing them to the people they'd conned. And that, I knew, was the one thing Gavin Cole feared more than any prison. The preliminary hearing was set. I went to the courthouse the day before, just to see it. It was a massive, old marble room, silent, empty. The afternoon sun streamed in. illuminating the dust motes. I stood in the center, where I'd be standing tomorrow. I felt calm. My hands were steady. I was no longer a nurse or a soldier. I was here, in this room, like I was in an operating theater. I had the charts. I had the x-rays. I knew exactly where the disease was, and I was ready to make the first cut. The courtroom was not like the conference room. It was bigger, colder, and utterly public. The walls were paneled in dark wood. The ceilings were vaulted, and the air smelled of floor polish and a century of stale, anxious sweat. The public gallery was packed, a sea of unfamiliar faces. I saw the press, their notebooks out, their faces predatory and sharp, and in the back, sitting in a silent, uniformed row, were Mr. Henderson and his VFW crew, their hats held respectfully in their laps. They were here as my witnesses, my honor guard. On the right side, the Cole family. They had come in force. Gavin, his face a pale, strained mask of composure, sat next to his lawyers. Aunt Marjorie was there, her face veiled in black as if she were at a funeral, which, I supposed, she was, the funeral of her family's reputation. Mr. Grayson and I sat at the left table. He was a picture of calm, his files stacked in neat, precise order. I sat beside him, my back straight, my hands clasped in my lap. I was no longer a nurse or a soldier. I was Eleanor Grace Cole, and I was here to claim my name. The Cole family lawyer, a slick, silver-haired man named Bressler, stood up. His voice was a smooth, deep baritone, the kind that was made to sound reasonable and authoritative. He began by painting a masterpiece. He spoke of General Everett Cole, the hero, the patriot, the philanthropist. A man, Bressler boomed, his voice echoing in the chamber, whose entire life was dedicated to two things, his country and his family, a family devoted to this community, a family whose name, for 3 generations, has been synonymous with service. He gestured to Gavin, who looked suitably humble. And now, Bressler said, his voice dropping, at the end of that long, distinguished life, at his weakest moment, we have a stranger, a person, with no connection to this family, who appeared, as if from nowhere, in the final, confusing weeks, a person who now seeks to dismantle that entire legacy, to seize control of a lifetime of work, for her own personal and immediate gain. He was good. He was painting me as the opportunistic vulture, and them as the grieving protectors. Then, it was Mr. Grayson's turn. He did not boom. He stood, put on his glasses, and spoke in a crisp, clear, factual tone, as if he were a doctor reading a chart. Your Honor, he said, Mr. Bressler's portrait of the family is incomplete. Let's complete it. We submit, as evidence, Exhibit A, a certified DNA analysis, commissioned by General Cole himself, proving, with a 99.9% certainty, that my client is his biological granddaughter. A ripple went through the press gallery. We submit Exhibit B, my client's certified birth certificate, name, Eleanor Grace Cole, mother, Emily Cole, father, General Everett Cole. This time, it was a gasp. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Alito, looked down at the document, her expression unreadable. And we submit Exhibit C through F, a collection of letters from Ava Cole, the General's sister, to the General, detailing a pattern of familial coercion and blackmail perpetrated by their older brother, Charles Cole Sr. Bressler was on his feet. Objection! This is rumor, hearsay. It has no bearing on— It has every bearing, Your Honor, Grayson said calmly, as it establishes the motive for my client's mother and grandmother to be erased from the family history, a history this family is now, once again, attempting to rewrite. But we are not just here to discuss the past. We are here to discuss the present. The prosecution calls its first witness, Mrs. Agnes Harlow. The side door to the courtroom opened. Mrs. Harlow was wheeled in, her oxygen tank hissing in the silence. She looked even smaller, even frailer, than she had in the library, a bailiff helped her get situated in the witness box. Her hand, when she took the oath, was so thin it looked like a cluster of twigs, and it was shaking. Mr. Grayson was gentle. "Mrs. Harlow, you were the bookkeeper for the Coal and Veterans Foundation for how long?" 28 years, she whispered, her voice reedy. "First for Mr. Charles Jr., then for Mr. Gavin." Gavin, across the room, was staring at her. His face was white. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. "And in that time, were you ever asked to perform duties outside the normal scope of accounting?" "Objection!" Bressler shouted. "Vague, leading." "Sustained. Rephrase. Mr. Grayson," the judge said. "Mrs. Harlow," Grayson said. "Did Mr. Charles Jr. ever ask you to modify the foundation's ledgers?" Her eyes filled with tears. She looked at Gavin, then quickly looked away. "Yes," she whispered. "In what way?" He found a mistake I made, years ago, an error. He said he would report me, that I'd lose my job, my pension, that he'd tell people I was a thief." She was crying now, quiet, desperate sobs. "I was a single mother. I had to do what he said." "And what did he tell you to do?" "He told me to clean the books, to make the transfers, the ones to the consulting firms, the boat, the beach house. He said it was just smart accounting, but I knew it was stealing from the soldiers." Gavin had his head in his hands. Bressler was silent. The entire courtroom was holding its breath. "Thank you, Mrs. Harlow," Grayson said gently. "No further questions." Bressler stood, but he knew a lost cause. "No questions for this? Confused and clearly ill witness, Your Honor." "The witness may step down," the judge said, her voice a little softer. "The prosecution calls its next witness," Mr. Grayson said, his voice ringing with new authority. "Mr. Albert Reeves." There was a stir. Gavin looked up, his face a mask of pure confusion. "Who?" he whispered to his lawyer. An old man stood up from the back of the courtroom. He was in his late 70s, with a shock of white hair and a kind, tired face. He walked, slowly but steadily, to the stand. He was carrying a worn, leather-bound book. "Mr. Reeves," Grayson began, "please state your occupation for the court." "I'm retired now. Son," Mr. Reeves said, his voice clear. "But for 45 years, I was a lawyer, here in Ridgefield, practiced in estate and family law." "And in that capacity, did you ever have dealings with the Cole family?" "Oh, yes," Reeves said, with a small, sad smile. "For many years, I was one of the junior lawyers at the firm that represented Cole Industries. Back when Charles Sr. was in charge, I did the work the senior partners didn't want to touch." He placed his hand on the leather book. "I kept a private journal, a notebook, of every meeting. My partners said I was meticulous to a fault." "Mr. Reeves, do you recall a meeting, some 25, perhaps 30 years ago, with a woman named Ava Cole?" Bressler was on his feet again. "Objection, Your Honor. This is ancient history. It is irrelevant and hearsay." "Your Honor," Grayson countered, "this testimony will establish the root of the conspiracy my client is a victim of. It will prove, beyond any doubt, the Cole family's long-standing pattern of coercion and blackmail. This is the origin of the crime." The judge looked at Reeves. She looked at me. "I'll allow it, but make your point. Mr. Grayson." "Mr. Reeves," Grayson said. "The meeting with Ava Cole." "Yes," Reeves said. He opened his notebook, his fingers tracing the old, faded ink. "I remember it like it was yesterday. She came in, terrified. A beautiful, terrified woman. She had her daughter with her, a young teenager. That would be Emily. My heart stopped. He had seen my mother. Ava. Ava was looking for legal advice. Reeves continued, his voice dropping as he read his own notes. She told me her brother, Charles Sr., was threatening her. She said he wanted to take the child, to raise her the proper Cole way. And what did she mean by that? She meant as a bargaining chip, Reeves said, his eyes filled with an ancient anger. Ava, you see, she owned a significant portion of the family trust. Charles Sr. wanted it. He wanted total control, and Ava wouldn't give it to him, so he used the girl, Emily. I was gripping the edge of the table, my knuckles white. Ava loved that girl more than life, Reeves said. She came to me. She asked me, can he take her? And I had to tell her the truth. I said, Ava, Charles will drag you through the mud. He will paint you as an unfit, unwed mother. He will use all his money, all his power. He will probably win. And what happened next? Charles Sr. He caught wind she'd come to see me. He was furious. He called me to his office, and he had me draft an agreement. What kind of agreement? A choice, Reeves said, his voice thick with self-loathing. I still see it in my nightmares. He read from his book. Option A. Ava Cole signs over her entire portion of the family trust, her shares in Cole Industries, and her seat on the foundation board, and she is free to leave with the child. Option B. She refuses, and Charles Sr. files a motion for guardianship of Emily Cole on the grounds of maternal incompetence. He looked up, his eyes finding mine in the courtroom. He didn't want the girl. You understand. I knew he didn't. He couldn't stand that Ava had someone she loved more than his money. He had to take it. He had to win. So what did she do? Grayson asked, his voice quiet. She chose her daughter, Reeves said. She signed everything. She walked out of my office with nothing. She and Emily, they just vanished. And Charles got everything. And you? You said nothing? Mr. Reeves looked down, his face a mask of shame. I was a young lawyer, with a new mortgage and 2 kids. Charles Cole. He could have ended me. He could have had me disbarred. I was a coward. I stayed silent. And what about my mother? Emily. I couldn't help it. I whispered the words. The judge didn't gavel me. The whole room was listening. Reeves looked at me, his eyes full of a terrible sorrow. Charles wasn't done. A few years later, he called me again. He'd found them. He said Emily had gotten herself into trouble, some financial irregularity at the foundation, the one Charles Jr. was running. He said she'd signed papers she shouldn't have. He said, she can go to prison and lose her own child, or she can sign this. Sign what? I breathed. A final agreement, a non-disclosure, that she would never use the Cole name, never contact the family, that she would disappear. In exchange, he would make the charges go away, the charges he had manufactured. My mother's note. Forgive me. Don't find them. She hadn't been hiding me from the truth. She had been protecting me from them. She had been given the same terrible choice her mother had, lose her money or lose her child. She had chosen me. My anger, the small, lingering resentment I'd had for my mother, for the secrets, for the name. It didn't just fade. It was burned away. It was replaced by a wave of such profound, suffocating love and gratitude that I had to put a hand to my mouth to keep from sobbing. She hadn't been a victim. She had been a warrior. She had sacrificed everything so I wouldn't be a pawn. Why now? Mr. Reeves? Grayson asked, his voice thick. Why come forward now, after all this time? Reeves closed his book. He looked at the judge. Because I'm an old man. I've made my peace with my maker, but I can't. I can't leave this world. Knowing I let it happen, I stayed silent. And then I read the papers. I saw this young woman's face, and I saw them. I saw Ava. I saw Emily, and I saw this family, trying to do it again, trying to erase another generation, trying to use a child as a bargaining chip. He looked at Gavin, his gaze like steel. I decided, I will not let history repeat, not on my watch. There was a profound, heavy silence in the courtroom. Mr. Bressler, the slick lawyer, looked like he had been turned to stone. He stood, but no words came out. No questions, Your Honor. Judge Alito looked at the Cole family. Her gaze was not merciful. We will take a recess, she said, her voice like cracking ice. The parties will meet in my chambers, now. She slammed the gavel. As we stood, Mr. Grayson leaned over. She's not just suggesting we negotiate, he whispered. She's hinting, she's telling them that if this goes one step further, she will have no choice but to open a full, state-level criminal investigation into the Foundation, an investigation that will no longer be about the will. It will be about racketeering. It will be about prison. I walked toward the chambers, my legs shaking. In the small, private hallway, we passed them. Gavin, his lawyers, Aunt Marjorie. Gavin's face was not angry. It was not smug. It was the face of a man who had just had the floor, the walls, and the ceiling of his life completely disintegrate. It was the face of pure, abject terror. He had to face the truth, not just the truth of his grandfather, but the truth of his own. Personal, criminal liability. He had a choice. Continue this fight and lose everything. His money, his name, his freedom, or he could surrender. He could accept that I was the heir, that I, Eleanor Grace Cole, would be the one to decide the fate of the Cole and Veterans Foundation. His entire world now rested on me. The judge's chambers were a neutral, pressurized room, all beige walls and bad art. It felt like a decompression chamber, a place between the public war of the courtroom and the private reality of what was to come. Judge Alito had given us 1 hour and a small mediation room down the hall. The air was thick with the smell of their defeat. Gavin sat at the far end of the table, flanked by Bressler and 2 other stone-faced lawyers. He was pale, his hands visibly shaking, his eyes fixed on a spot on the wall. Aunt Marjorie sat near him, her face composed, as if she were waiting for a verdict she already knew. Bressler, to his credit, was a professional. The silver-haired orator was gone, replaced by a pragmatic, cutthroat negotiator. He set his briefcase on the table and opened it. "This has been an illuminating morning," he said, his voice clipped. "My clients, the Cole family, are, as you know, pillars of this community. They are not interested in a protracted, public, and frankly, unseemly legal battle. This testimony, while colorful, is uncorroborated and based on the memories of the very elderly and the very sick." I felt Mr. Grayson tense beside me, but I put a hand on his arm. I wanted to hear the offer. "However," Bressler continued, "in the interest of closure and to honor the General's memory, my clients are prepared to offer a generous settlement, a final resolution." He slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "We propose the following. The family will withdraw its suit contesting the will. In exchange, Ms. Grant," he said my name as if it were a legal term, "will accept a one-time payment of $5 million, tax-free." Gavin flinched, even at that. "In return," Bressler said, his eyes locking on mine, "she will cede all claims to the remainder of the estate, including all real property, and most critically, she will cede all claims to and control of the Cole and Veterans Foundation. She will, of course, sign a binding, permanent non-disclosure agreement regarding all family matters, personal and financial. She will take her generous gift, and she will return to her private life. We can all walk out of here today, and this unpleasantness is over." It was the same deal. It was the exact same rotten choice Charles Sr. had given my grandmother. Take the money, shut up, disappear. Gavin was watching me, a flicker of his old, arrogant smirk returning. He thought this was it. He thought I was just like them, that I had a price. I looked at the paper, then I looked at Bressler, and I smiled. No, I said. The room went perfectly silent. Bressler's professional calm wavered. I beg your pardon? I said no, I repeated. I'm not interested in your money, Mr. Bressler. Then what is this? Bressler sputtered, gesturing around the room. Are you demanding more? She doesn't need to demand more, Mr. Grayson said, his voice cutting in, cold and sharp as a scalpel. She already has it all. The will is valid. You know it, I know it, and the judge knows it. What you just offered wasn't a settlement. It was an insult. I don't need more money, I said, leaning forward. My voice was quiet, but it filled the room. I need the Coal and Veterans Foundation to not be a criminal enterprise. I need it to actually help the veterans it's been stealing from for 30 years. You can't. Gavin finally spoke, his voice a hoarse whisper. It's our foundation. Not anymore, Mr. Grayson said. He pulled a file from his own briefcase and opened it. We decline your offer, but we are prepared to make a counter-offer, a final resolution of our own. You see, my client is, as you've pointedly observed, a nurse. She's interested in healing, not protracted, public, unpleasantness. He slid his own paper across the table. Point 1, Grayson said. The Cole family, all of you, will, immediately, publicly, and with prejudice, withdraw your lawsuit. You will sign a legal stipulation, to be filed with the court this afternoon, that General Cole's will, the one naming my client as the sole heir, is valid and incontestable. She gets everything, the house, the trust, the inheritance. As he intended, Bressler's face was white. And in return? What do you concede? In return, Grayson said, we concede. Point 2, my client, in her new capacity as the executor of the Cole estate, will agree not to pursue, at this time, a private criminal lawsuit. She will not, personally, hand those ledgers or Mrs. Harlow's testimony to the state attorney general. The collective sigh of relief from their side of the table was audible. In exchange, Grayson continued, his voice like iron, for point 3, you, Gavin Cole, and your siblings will immediately resign from the board of the Cole and Veterans Foundation. You will transfer full, total, and complete control of that foundation, its assets, and all its accounts, to an independent, court-approved oversight board, a board that we will select. You're trying to steal our foundation, Gavin shouted, surging to his feet. We're trying to save it. Mr. Cole, Grayson snapped. We're trying to save you from prison. Sit down. Gavin sat. And point 4, Grayson said, his gaze fixed on Gavin. You, the Cole family, will repay the foundation, every single cent, the yacht, the beach house, the consulting fees. Mrs. Harlow's records are meticulous. We've run the numbers, with interest, over 30 years. You owe the veterans of Virginia just over $28 million. You will pay it back. You have 3 years, an installment plan, to be monitored by the court. Gavin looked like he was going to throw up. 28 million. That's robbery. That's impossible. That would ruin us. It's the cost of theft. Mr. Cole, Grayson said calmly, a bill, long overdue. Gavin was just shaking his head, his mouth open. Bressler was scribbling calculations, his face a mask of horror, and I spoke. That's not all, I said. Every head in the room snapped toward me. Even Mr. Grayson looked surprised. I hadn't told him about this part. What do you mean? Bressler asked, his voice wary. The 28 million, I said. That's just balancing the books. That's just paying back what you stole. That isn't justice. That's just accounting. What? What do you want? Gavin hissed, his eyes narrowing. I want restitution, I said. On top of the repayment, your family, the branch of Charles Cole Sr., will take 20%, 1/5, of all its annual profits from your businesses, your investments, your trusts, and you will donate it every year in perpetuity. Donate it? Bressler asked, looking for a loophole. To the foundation? No, I said. I let a small, cold smile touch my lips. Not to the foundation. You will donate it to my clinic, to the Cole Legacy Center, the one I am building in the General's house. Gavin's face went from pale to a deep, dark purple. You want us to pay for your project? Out of our pockets? Yes, I said. And the donation. It must be made publicly. It must be listed. Not from the Cole family, but from the individuals. It will be the Gavin Cole Restitution Fund, the Charles Jr. Memorial Fund. Your names, your father's name, they will be tied forever, not to your crime, but to your repayment, to the healing, every year. The veterans you stole from will see your name on a plaque in my lobby, thanking you for finally doing the right thing, because I am making you. Never! Gavin roared. He didn't just stand. He exploded. He slammed his hands on the table so hard the water glasses jumped. Never! This is humiliation. You're trying to destroy our name. I would rather go to jail. I swear to God, I will. Gavin. The voice was not loud. It was quiet, but it was steel. It was Aunt Marjorie. You be quiet. Marjorie, Gavin spat, wheeling on her. You see what she's doing? She's trying to. No, Gavin, she said, and she stood up. The frail, weeping woman from the courtroom was gone. In her place was a matriarch I had never seen, her eyes clear and cold. I will not be quiet, not again. She looked at Bressler. He's right. Our grandfather, Charles Sr., was a monster. My brother, Charles Jr., was a thief. And you. She looked at Gavin, her eyes filled with a new, cold clarity. Are a fool, Marjorie, he warned. You did this, she said, her voice shaking but firm. You, with your forged will, with your yacht, you brought this on us. You brought her here, she gestured to me. We have been living on stolen blood money, she said, her voice rising, speaking to her entire side of the table. For 30 years, we knew. We didn't want to know, but we knew. We knew Ava and Emily were gone. We knew the money was easy, and we kept our mouths shut. We were afraid of losing our place. She looked at me. Her eyes were not friendly, but they were, for the first time, respectful. The Cole name is not shameful because this young woman exists, she said, her voice ringing with the authority of Mr. Reeves. The Cole name is shameful because we tried to erase her, because we chose the money, just like Charles. Just like Gavin. She turned back to her nephew. He's not asking for jail, you idiot. She pointed at Mr. Grayson. He's offering you a way to not go to jail. He's offering you a way to pay it back. And she looked at me. She is offering us a way to finally do something good with that name. She looked at Bressler, her face set. You sign it. You sign whatever they put in front of you. It's a better deal than we deserve. Gavin was isolated. He looked around, at his cousins, at his siblings. They wouldn't meet his eye. They were all looking at Marjorie. They were all ashamed. And they were all, more than anything, terrified of prison. The fight was over. He had been defeated, not by me, by his own aunt. An hour later, we were standing in front of Judge Alito. The agreement was signed, notarized, and filed. They withdrew the suit. They accepted the will. They would cede the foundation. They would pay the restitution. They would fund my clinic. They also agreed. As a last-minute addition from Grayson, to public financial reporting for the next 10 years. I didn't ask for an apology. I didn't need one. As we were leaving the room, I said it, just to Mr. Grayson. I didn't ask them to apologize. He nodded, packing his briefcase. It wouldn't be real. No, I said, watching Gavin stalk out of the room, his face a mask of thunder. But their conscience and that annual check, that will do the job better than any speech. As I was walking down the long marble hall, my steps echoing, a small, tentative voice called my name. Ms. Grant? Eleanor? I turned. It was one of the younger cousins, a woman in her early 20s, with the same coal eyes, but they were soft. I'm Lily, she said. Gavin's, my cousin. She blushed. What my family did, what we did. I'm so sorry. Thank you, Lily, I said. I'm a social worker, she said, twisting her hands. I just graduated. I'm not like them, and I want to help. With your center, I don't want any money. I want to volunteer. I want to try and atone for my generation, for what they did. She was sincere. I could see it. I looked at her. She was the first Cole who had ever offered anything. All right, Lily, I said. You can help. Her face lit up. But, I said, and my voice was firm. There's one rule at the center. You're not a Cole. That name. It doesn't mean power there. It doesn't mean money. It doesn't mean you're in charge. It's just a reminder of what happens when you put money before people. It's a reminder not to repeat the old mistakes. She looked at me, her eyes wide, and she nodded. I understand, she whispered. Thank you. I pushed open the heavy doors of the courthouse. The late afternoon sun hit me. It was blinding. Mr. Henderson and his crew were standing on the steps, waiting. Well, ma'am? Mr. Henderson asked, his old face a roadmap of anxiety. I looked at him, and I smiled, a real smile. We're clear, Mr. Henderson, I said. The permits. They're all clear. We can get back to work. The men. They cheered. A small, gruff, powerful cheer. Right on the steps of the courthouse. I walked past them. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like I had won a war. I just felt light. I felt as if, after 30 years, I had finally, reached into the past and pulled a long, poisoned, rusty knife out of the heart of my family. It was a knife that had bled my grandmother. It had bled my mother, and it had bled me. The bleeding had finally stopped. It took 6 months. 6 months of hammers, drywall dust, and the smell of fresh paint. 6 months of fighting with contractors, arguing over permits, and watching the first restitution check from Gavin Cole's accounts clear, funding the very work he was trying to stop. Today, the work was finished. The house on the hill was unrecognizable. The gray, imposing stone was still there, but the windows were new, wide, and clean, letting the autumn light flood in. The massive front lawn, once a sterile green moat, was now filled with people, hundreds of them, veterans in their VFW hats, families from town, kids chasing each other around the oak trees. Mr. Henderson and his crew were manning a barbecue grill, the smoke rising in a friendly plume. It felt like a block party, not a society launch. Stretched between the two massive stone pillars of the entryway, where a bronze Cole family crest had once been, was a simple canvas banner. It was painted by hand. It just said, "The Cole Legacy Center, open to all, no discrimination." I stood on the top step, looking out at the crowd. I wasn't in my old uniform. I was wearing a simple, clean white blouse, my nurse's blouse. Around my neck, on a thin silver chain, was the small, tarnished silver locket I'd found in the bottom of Ava's chest, the one I'd almost missed. I'd taken it to a jeweler. The back was engraved with 3 tiny, ornate letters, E.G.C., Eleanor Grace Cole. It must have been my grandmother's gift to my mother, a gift she never got to wear. This was the first time I had worn it. It wasn't heavy at all. Behind me, Mrs. Nolan stood, her hands clasped, a small, proud smile on her face. Next to her was Mr. Henderson, and next to him, looking nervous but determined in a volunteer t-shirt, was Lily Cole, holding a clipboard. A few of her younger cousins were there, too, awkwardly helping pass out bottles of water. They were the first to break ranks, the first to follow Aunt Marjorie's lead. They were proof that the past didn't just have to be a war, it could be a lesson. Mr. Grayson, looking oddly relaxed in a suit on a Saturday, made his way through the crowd. He came up the steps, his face breaking into a rare, genuine smile. It's really something, Ms. Grant," he said, looking at the house. You've done it. We've done it," I corrected him, gesturing to the crowd of volunteers. "Yes, well," he seemed uncharacteristically emotional. He reached into his suit pocket. "There is one last thing, from the General, his final piece of correspondence." He pulled out a small, simple USB flash drive. "He gave this to me the day he recorded the video for the lawsuit," Grayson said, his voice low. "He gave me very specific instructions," he said. "If she runs, if she takes the money and disappears, you throw this in the river, but if she stays, if she fights, and if she builds something, if that place, if my house, becomes what she wants, you give this to her. On the day it opens," he pressed the small, cold piece of plastic into my hand. He said it was the last word. He wanted you to have it before you spoke. My heart was pounding. I closed my hand around it. "Thank you. Mr. Grayson, can you give me 10 minutes? The new director's office has a computer." "Of course," he said. "Take your time. The people can wait." I slipped away, into the new, bright hallway. I went into what had been Charles Sr.'s study, the room with the safe. It was now my office. It was bright, the walls painted a warm cream, the heavy dark desk replaced with a simple wooden one. I slid the drive into the port on the small laptop. A single file popped up. Final, MP4. I clicked it. The General's face filled the screen. He was in his study. He was not in uniform. He was in a simple, worn burgundy bathrobe. He looked small, tired, but his eyes were clearer than I'd ever seen them. He was not in pain. "Eleanor," he said, and the name, my name, from him, hit me like a physical blow. If you are watching this, then you did it. You stayed. And you built. I knew you would." He took a shaky breath. I am not a good man. I am a man who was good at one thing, at being a soldier. I was a terrible brother, a non-existent father. I let my brother, Charles, I let his ambition, his greed, I let him define my life, to protect, my career, my legacy. I let him bully my sister, Ava. the best of us, the kindest. He looked away from the camera, his eyes glistening. And I failed my daughter, Emily, your mother. I let her be raised as a shameful secret. I let Charles use her, and I let him lie to me. I let him tell me she was gone. It was easier. It was easier to believe they were gone than to face what I had done, what I had allowed to be done, to my own blood, for a reputation, for a name. He looked back, his eyes boring into me, through the screen, through time. And then I met you, my nurse, my Carly, with Ava's eyes and Emily's stubborn chin. He smiled, a small, sad, broken smile. You have done the hardest thing. Eleanor, you chose responsibility over the money. The money would have been easier. You could have run, God knows. You had the right to, but you stayed. You have more courage than I ever did. His voice cracked. You don't owe them anything. You don't owe the Cole name a damn thing. It is a broken, tarnished name. But the people, the people they hurt, the people I hurt, by my silence. You owe them. You owe them a chance to prove that the Cole name can mean something good. Finally, you are not the answer to our mistakes. You are a new beginning. He took a long, rattling breath. Your mother, Emily, I hope, now, you understand why she ran, why she hid you. She wasn't a victim. She was a lion. She saved you. She did the one thing I was too cowardly to do. She chose her child over everything. She saved you from us. The video was just his face, his eyes, swimming with tears. Don't let our poison ruin you. Let this place, let this house, let it heal. Let it heal. More people than the Cole name has ever hurt. That is my last order. Heal them. His hand came up. He reached, as if to touch the screen. My granddaughter. The screen went black. I sat there, in the silence of my new office, the sounds of the crowd outside muffled, and I let myself cry. I cried for him, for his mistakes, for his regrets. I cried for my mother's impossible choice. I cried for Ava. And then I wiped my eyes. I stood up. I walked out of the office, back into the bright, noisy hallway, and out onto the front step. The crowd quieted. Mr. Grayson handed me a small microphone. I looked out at all of them, the veterans, the families, the volunteers, Lily, Mrs. Nolan. Thank you, I said, my voice clear, steady. Thank you for coming, for helping. This house has been a symbol in this town for a long time, a symbol of wealth, of power, of a family. I paused. The general didn't want his legacy to be a monument to that. He didn't want a statue. He wanted a place of service. He knew that healing was more important than history. He wanted this place to help, not to be a monument to a family, but to be a home, a community. I looked out, and I saw him, on the very edge of the crowd, by the newly planted flower beds, where the oaks met the lawn, Gavin. He was not in a suit. He was in a simple polo shirt, khakis. He looked smaller, thinner. He was alone. No lawyers, no family, no reporters. He was just standing there, staring, not at me. He was staring at the sign, the one that read, "The Cole Legacy Center." He just stared. His face was a complex, unreadable mask of hollowing loss, of regret. I finished my speech. I cut the ribbon. The crowd cheered. The doors opened. People flooded in. The clinic was open. I stayed on the porch, shaking hands. Mr. Henderson, Mrs. Nolan, and I felt a presence. I turned. Gavin was standing there, in the hallway. He was just standing inside, looking lost. He started. His voice was, I'd never heard it before. It was quiet, awkward. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was looking at the new woodwork. It's very bright, he said, lamely. That was the point, I said. My voice was not hard. It was just neutral. He finally looked at me. His eyes were red. He would have... He swallowed. He would have been very proud of this. This is what he always talked about. Service. I thought it was a word. He would be very proud of what you've done. It was an admission. It was an apology. The only one he knew how to give. I looked at him. The man who had tried to destroy me. The man who had forged a will. The man who had bought a yacht with money for heroes. And I felt nothing. No rage, no hate, just a profound tiredness. He deserved to be proud of his legacy. Gavin, I said. I know, he whispered, looking at the floor. If you want to help. With that, I said, and my voice was firm, but not unkind. If you want to be a part of that, make sure that foundation, the one you are now, in charge of, is run honestly. Make sure the money, all of it, goes to the people who need it. I looked him in the eye. That the only way you will ever repay what you and your family took. He just stood there, and he nodded, a small, jerky, broken motion. Then he just turned, and he walked out of the front door. He didn't look back. He walked down the driveway, carrying a new, a different, a heavier burden. I didn't expect him to change. Not in a day, but I knew from now on, this place, this mirror, this monument to what he wasn't, it would always be here. He would have to live with what I had built. I turned. I took a deep breath. The smell of fresh paint and new beginnings. I walked down the newly polished hallway, in the old sunroom, where they used to have their cocktail parties. Children were playing in a brightly lit waiting area. Their parents were talking, laughing, not whispering. In the old ballroom, where I'd stood on my first night, Mr. Henderson was being fitted for a new physical therapy brace. There was no violence. There was no abuse. There was only care. There was only protection. I walked to the front door, to the plaque by the entrance. I touched the cold, newly engraved brass. It just said, The Cole Legacy Center. I touched the name. Mom, I whispered, so low no one could hear. I didn't let them rewrite our story, and I didn't let them. I turned from the sign. I looked down the hall. At the first exam room, a young family was waiting. Lily, my cousin, poked her head out. Ms. Grant, your first patient is ready. I smiled. I walked into the room, leaving the past behind, carrying the truth on my shoulders, and stepping into the future I had chosen. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from, so drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting the hype button so more people can hear this story.